Hello, lovely people. So, seeing as I'm coming to the end of my time here as a temporary Santiaguino, I thought I would take a minute to share my thoughts, observations, and general tips about getting around Santiago. One of the great things about Santiago is that it has a very comprehensive public transport system. There are basically three ways that you can get around. By car, in which I'm including taxis, by bus, which is also known as the micro, or by train, by which I mean metro, by which I mean underground rail system within the city. The other secret fourth way is to just walk around everywhere, which I'll talk about at the end. If at any point you're only interested in hearing about one of these things, click one of these links to be taken directly to the section where I talk about that. But if you want to hear them all, stay tuned. So first up is by car. Seeing as I said that we would talk about public transport, first let's talk about taxis. Within taxis, there are actually three subcategories of taxis. There are the normal kind of taxis, which are very clearly marked with yellow and black. The taxis in Santiago are relatively safe. Really, the only scams that you run into are the same kind of thing that you run into anywhere, where the driver will take a much more circuitous route instead of going straight to where you need to be to try to charge you more. Something else to know about taxis is that every single traditional taxi will have a ticker box that will show you the amount of money that you should be spending. There's a flat rate, and then based on the amount of time you're in the car and the number of kilometers that you go, you get charged more. You also should always be able to get a receipt. Now, paying for taxis, you typically can do it in cash. Some taxi drivers will allow you to pay with a credit card, but it's best to have a good amount of cash on you. Another thing is that you do not tip taxi drivers in Santiago. Normal taxis work the way that normal taxis do, based on an American experience. You hail them down on the side of the road. The second taxi that exists is a colectivo. Colectivos basically work like minibuses. They're the same size as a normal taxi, but on the roof they have a sign that says the street route that it goes on. These taxis are typically much cheaper and charge a flat rate, but also will pick up people until the car is full. So you're not guaranteed going directly from place 1 to place 2. However, if you're traveling short distances within the city, these are a really great way to go, and again, pretty secure within Santiago. The final way is the radio taxi, or radio taxi. Now these look like cars. They just look like normal cars. The way that they function is that they're a called taxi service. For some of them, the company is the one that you call and they send over a driver. The opposite of that being that you actually get a card from the taxi driver himself. Even though these look like regular cars, they tend to be pretty secure and are one of the easiest ways to go long distances at weird hours of the day. You can call in advance to make sure that you'll have someone to pick you up at 4 a.m. to get to the airport, or you can call the minute of to try to get a much cheaper rate if you're going long distances. Also, if you do speak Spanish, calling for radio taxi is a lot easier, and you can usually get an estimation on the rate that they will most likely charge you, and if the driver tells you something drastically different, make sure to bring up that you've already asked and that's what they said. Usually that'll get you the cheaper rate. Now, the other way to go around in car with Santiago is by driving on your own. However, if you don't speak very good Spanish and are a very experienced city driver, I wouldn't really recommend it. The first reason why it's made difficult is that all the signs are in Spanish. There are no translations anywhere except on pedestrian signs. So some examples. Y is estacionar, which means parking. So an E with a cross through it means no parking. Because it's a city of a couple million people, traffic gets really hectic during rush hours, which is typically between 6 and 9 a.m. and p.m. A lot of streets, especially in the morning, will only run one way, but only Monday through Friday and only when there aren't holidays. All of this is clearly notated, but if you don't speak Spanish, it can get pretty confusing where you can drive when. Another thing to note is that a lot of streets are one-way or two-way, which you can tell by the arrow to the right or left of the street sign. Another thing that complicates it is that there are a lot of designated bus lanes. Now these are great if you're traveling by bus or taxi because they get you around a lot of the early morning congestion. However, they do make driving around Santiago a lot more complicated, and I'd recommend that if you're only here for a short amount of time, not to bother. On to method of transport 2. Buses, as I've said, are called micros. The bus system does not accept cash at all. It only runs on beeps, the public transit cards. These work for buses and the metro, and are very straightforward, but you do have to get a hold of them. You can buy them in various places around the city that say that they sell beep cards. However, again, this can be something a little bit more complicated. For the buses, there are a bunch of different kinds that are color-coded. There are hyper-local buses, urban and local buses, and only urban buses. When I say urban, these are typically the buses that run around Santiago's main metropolitan area. The local buses are the ones that go out to the neighborhoods, and in a lot of cases, a bus is the only way to get there. Like I said though, these buses are color-coded, which makes it a lot easier to tell from a long distance whether or not you actually need to check if this is your bus or not. You have to flag them down, which is exactly the same thing that you do in a taxi at one of the clearly marked bus stops. Once on the bus, you place your beep against the reader and it will show up with a bright green check mark if your payment was accepted and an X if it wasn't. Sometimes the bus drivers will let you ride if you've run out of money, but they are cracking down on that. Sometimes the card reader is actually outside the bus if you're at a particularly busy station. If you're at the last stop or the first stop on a route, people will line up. Also, the bright orange seats in the bus are typically reserved for pregnant women, old people, and people who have injuries and small children, not necessarily at the same time. However, if there are none of the above, you are free to sit there. Just be ready to give up your seat. One of the downsides with riding a bus is that it's not always clear when you're getting close to your destination. However, if you speak Spanish, Chileans are more than happy to tell you where the bus runs, and the bus driver, him or herself, will usually help you out. To get off the bus, you have to find one of these small buttons and press it. Although if you're getting off at a heavily used stop, odds are someone else on the bus will press it. However, if you don't press that button, you're not guaranteed that the bus will stop at all. If you don't speak Spanish, getting around can be a little bit more difficult, but transantiago.cl, which is transantiago.cl, is a very comprehensive website that will show you the bus routes, the colors of the buses, where they run, where the stops are, and when you use that in conjunction with a map service like Google Maps or mapcity.cl, it's pretty easy to find your way around. The plus side to the bus system, it gets you places that the metro and walking doesn't. It's a lot cheaper than taking a taxi, and there are often musicians, clowns, poetry readers, and something exciting happening on the bus. You also get to see the city from above ground as opposed to metro, which although much faster, is underground. Some parts of the metro do run above ground, but the majority in the touristy sections are subways. Which brings me to the third option for getting around Santiago, the metro. Metro is straightforward, clean, and fast. I've never waited for more than 5 minutes for a metro. The downsides are that it doesn't run everywhere in the city. Currently, there are routes 1, 2, 4, and 5. 3 and 6 are in progress and should fill in some of the gaps that the metro leaves open right now, but they've been in progress for a long time. To use the metro, you can pay with your beep or by buying a ticket, which makes it a lot easier for tourists who don't necessarily have a beep. You can buy single tickets by going to the counter and asking for one, as well as recharge your beep there. You can recharge your beep in other locations that have a sign that says so, but for tourists, the metro is probably the easiest way. Downsides to taking the metro are that it gets really crowded, especially during rush hours, which, as I said, are 6 to 9 a.m. and p.m. Another downside of the metro is that it doesn't always run. Typically, it's only open between 7:30 a.m. and 11:30 p.m. However, on weekends and holidays, that changes. Even though the metro is fast, if you're looking to go out and experience the nightlife of Santiago, it's maybe not the best bet. Another thing that makes them a bit more complicated is that routes 2, 4, and 5 during rush hour run express. Basically, all of the stations become color-coded, the options being green and red or green and red. When the train comes into a station, it will have a light on the side that will show up as green or red, telling you which color stops it stops at. However, there are many common stations at which both colors stop, so if you get on the wrong one, you can get off at a common station and switch trains. To figure out which color the stations are and which color your station is, you can consult any of the maps on the actual platform. All of the signs are clearly marked, but things you should know are that salida means exit, solo cambio de anden means only for people who are switching sides of the track, and combinación a línea means combination to the other line. Follow the signs clearly and you shouldn't have any trouble in the metro. Depending on the time of day and the combination of bus and metro that you're going to use, there are different costs, which you can see on transantiago.cl. Punta is rush hour, Valle is normal, and Baja is low. One of the cool things about using a beep is that if you have to make a transfer or go from the metro to a bus or from a bus to another bus, you don't have to pay the same flat rate. You can make up to 2 combinations in 120 minutes, which is 2 hours, before having to pay the full price again. So say during rush hour, you need to take the metro. That's going to cost you 670 pesos. However, if you're taking the bus and then the metro, you have to pay 590 for the bus, and when you get onto the metro, you only pay 80 pesos more. Unfortunately, if you have to switch directions after leaving the ticketed area on the metro, you do have to pay again. But if you have to take 3 buses to get somewhere in the morning, you're only going to pay a maximum of 670 pesos. The cheapest that you can get around for is 560 during the low hours of the metro. One of the only downsides of the beep system is that there are no discounts. There are student discounts and senior discounts, but those are only available for Chilean residents. And if you're studying abroad, you can only apply for the student discount if you're staying there for an entire year. The buses do run 24 hours, but certain routes don't. So, if you're at the bus stop, make sure to look for a small asterisk next to the number of the bus that you need to go on. If you see the word nocturnal, odds are that it's saying that it doesn't run at night. However, most of the major routes that run between the neighborhoods and downtown do. Which brings me to the 4th way of getting around Santiago: walking. The great things about walking are that it is free. You get to see the city, and most of the tourist things are within walking distance of each other or within a metro. There are tons of sidewalks around the central area of Santiago and very clearly marked and respected crosswalks. One of my favorite being one that actually gets faster as your time runs out. Walking around, especially the tourist areas of Santiago, which are typically downtown or on the Red Line, is easy, but if you do happen to get lost, there are 2 things to keep in mind. One, that Santiaguinos love to help you out and are happy to give you directions, but you should probably ask more than one person because they also never are going to say that they don't know where you're trying to go. If you speak Spanish, this is a great way to get around. However, if you don't, something to keep in mind is that all of the street numbers are radiating out from a central point, which is Plaza Italia, located at the Baquedano metro stop. So if you're really lost, just keep trying to find 0. Another quick tip is, what is Alameda? You'll hear this a lot, especially if you're asking for directions and they say, oh, just take Alameda. Alameda is actually Avenida Libertador Bernardo O'Higgins, also called O'Higgins. This is the main artery through Santiago. The only downside to using or driving Alameda is that it's also where the majority of the protests march. But protests are another video. So with all that in mind, I hope that you have a wonderful time exploring this city.